Welcome everybody. Yes, I work for Dacom Farm Intelligence, and I also work for a government agency called DICTU, which is a IT provider for Ministry of Economic Affairs. So I have sort of the two phases, one small enterprise and one big government agency, so I know a little bit of both worlds. And I stole some graphics from some other Pygrunn conference. So I will talk a bit about Docker, about how we started with Docker and some wrong paths we took, some don'ts and some do's, and some tips and some alternatives for Docker. So, ha ha ha. So yeah, we started off sort of, with a lot of enthusiasm. We're using Docker. Like it's a nice way, instead of using virtual machines for spinning up environments, you can use Docker. And I don't know if anybody knows this image, for virtual machines, you put stuff on a machine and not a lot gets shared. And with Docker, you share a lot more, and you can run a lot of more applications on one server. How many of you are familiar with Docker? Have used it sometimes? A lot. Okay, so I don't need to. You know what the Docker file is? Everybody? And entry points and commands and stuff like that? Okay. Thanks. Another one. So we didn't realize maybe at the time we were starting with Docker all the pets versus cattle movement that was going around then. I think this is the original slide from some guy at Cloud Scaling and some guy from CERN who said, okay, we used to manage our servers as pets, and we would bring them back to life if there was something broken. And nowadays, with all the cloud movement, you should use them as cattle. Something's wrong, you just throw it away and spin up another one. But we started using containers as pets. So our Docker files would look like this. We're talking Ubuntu 14.4, right? That was the time we started. We would copy our application and stuff, but we would also install all kinds of other stuff. And we would run supervisor within that container, and we would start all that up, because then we found out, oh, you're supposed to run only one thing, but we want to run multiple things, so we started doing tricks in Endpoint to make it look like a server. And we didn't understand at first why our containers were stopping right away, so we put bash at the end of our entry point to keep it running. And then we, of course, we need something more. Oh, we just install it into our container. We just enter the container and do aptget. So your container is all out of sync with your Docker file, and it becomes a pet. We also keep those containers running all the time, and we use Fabric for deployment, and so we extended our Fabric files with things like run in container, which is some function that does just that. So it runs a command in the container, and it pulls the stuff from our Git repository into our container. So all sort of anti-patterns, you could say. And I dove a bit deeper into Docker at our site, and I sort of became the Docker guy, and I started writing scripts to make at least spinning up the containers reproducible. So I wrote stuff like this to create a database container and build our Docker image, and then create a container from that image. And of course, after a while, I came to realize there must be a smarter way, and that's something like Docker Compose. So and I must say we have not started using it yet, well, just a little bit. So we're just transitioning to some more advanced tools. So the don'ts I have come across so far is don't install stopping a tool running inside a running container. Don't put your version control into your container, but at container image creation time, you should put your app into the container, into the image. And don't keep it running a long time without security updates, obviously. If your things are hooked up to the internet especially, which is most stuff nowadays. Because we have even extended our long-running containers with unattended upgrades and stuff like that. So just to, you know, it's really a server, a pet. One more thing we tripped over was we were spinning up a container. We thought, well, if you map a port, like the red line, you're okay. It's only visible from that server, but no, it's exposed to outside the server. So anyone can touch that port then. And we have a setup where we have Nginx as a front end, and then our Python app stuff behind that, and we don't want the 8,000 ports exposed, of course. And so if you map a port, you should put this 127.0.0.1 in front of it, or some other IP range that you want to expose that port to. Has anyone run into this as well? Or is aware of it? Because, okay, yeah, some guy, okay. Okay, you're saying that there may be a default option for the Docker daemon to do just that by default. Okay, thanks for the tip. Because we thought we had universal, uncomplicated firewall running, and we thought we were covered, but no, Docker does manages IP tables or adds IP tables rules for you. So that's why we found out, oh, this port is exposed, help. We have to recreate the container, of course, because you cannot, once your container is created, you cannot change this port mapping. So you have to recreate it. If your container is a pet, and you're, oh, okay, how am I going to do this? Restart policies. If your server, you need to reboot your host, your Docker host, your server, for maintenance. If you don't there's a restart policy, then by default the containers don't start automatically. The default is no. So if you do maintenance and you forget to bring up your containers again, then you're out of service. So I recommend using unless stopped, the third option. Because if you may want to intentionally stop a container, then do your maintenance on your host server and then bring it back up, and so the container does not come back up again. Make sense? Okay. So some do's. We started off on a sort of fast track, and I think you should learn how to set up your containers as cattle and then use something like Docker Compose or Kubernetes or Mesos or something to, from the start, manage it the right way, let's say. As you know, they say containers are ephemeral, volatile, or whatever. Ephemeral is a nice word, nice esoteric word for it. You know, they're disposable, and they should be created and disposed of as common practice. And if you could even think about using then a platform as a service like Heroku. We have once looked at it, but we have a sort of, for our shop, it's I think it will be hard, because we have an application that a platform for farmers for doing their administration. So they can register parcels there. They can draw their parcels on the map and maintain all sorts of administration that they need to do. And we use a lot of GIS, geographic libraries, for that. So from our Docker files, for example, we install all this stuff. The third line, yellow line, GDL bin is a GIS library. And I wonder if it will, we haven't tried it yet, we wonder if that will really be installable on the Heroku platform, and all this other stuff that we need for some XML processing and stuff like that. We haven't tried it yet, but I wonder. So I think in the end we would like to run some stuff, you know, and not manage our own service anymore, and then let some cloud platform take care of our security stuff. But we're not. We think that our requirements are a bit special. Of course, everybody thinks that. So I'm sort of stating, on the one hand, don't use containers as servers or as pets. And on the other hand, you can use them as lightweight machines. So I was looking for some comments about that, and I found some small company from Enschede, which is called Fusion with PH, that says you should run containers as sort of mini servers, and you should take care of the zombie reaping problem, that your process number one has to reap your zombie processes, and you should have a syslog in your container. It's an opinion, you know. It's an approach, a different approach, as opposed to the Docker philosophy of run just one thing inside a container. Well, they say you should run one logical service in a container, but keep your system maintenance also in there. So that's a different approach. They have an open source base image for that takes care of all that stuff, and they say they've developed that over the course of the last 2-3 years. So they say that this is a good base image for taking care also of all that system maintenance stuff that I don't know too much about. So some tips and tricks that I found out while working with Docker. You can view files in your container, and lots of people do the first line, docker exec minus ti, your container name bash, and then go walk around container and see stuff and do stuff. Sort of a pet approach. One guy got tired at our company of what's the command again? So he wrote a docker bash shortcut, which does the exec minus ti. And but you know, this takes 2 steps. Where if you do docker exec blah blah bash, and you go walk around. If you know where the file is, you can just if you, from your command line, do the third line, of course, and get your output right away. So that may be handy, you know, if you're wondering what's inside your container, which you should know, of course, exactly. But sometimes you're in doubt. And we have some of these pets containers, and at one point I had to clone containers to get whatever state was in there, whatever configuration, a clone of that. So I started doing things like commit the container as it's running now, and gave it some label, that my app date, for example. And then you can run another container, a clone, based on that image. And whatever is in there starts running as a copy. And then I'm not mentioning volumes yet. I had to clone the volumes as well, so I started doing stuff like this. Stop the container. Here's finally a bit of Python. A one-liner for Python to parse the output of the docker inspect command, which gives you a whole JSON array of the configuration of your Docker container. And with this, I could get the volumes out as separate lines. And then you can say, okay, with Docker CP, you can copy stuff out of your container, out of that volume, into some temporary directory, and then copy it back to the clone that you create, and then you can run a cloned container. But it's really, you're fussing around a lot because you don't have a reproducible Docker setup. So we also use Docker to run Jenkins. We just spun up a Jenkins server from the Jenkins image, and we needed. We ran into trouble that the tests were running not fast enough, or they were interfering with each other. So we created a slave. We could even create several slaves. It's easy. But within a Docker container, by default, you don't have no X Windows server, so your Selenium tests, your UI tests that run in the browser don't work right away. So with XVFB, virtual frame buffer, run, if you put that in front of your test stuff, then it works. We also got hung up tests because of lack of shared memory, we found out after a while, so we needed to increase the shared memory. You had to recreate that slave container, and with the minus shared memory size option, and then things started working again. And there's some volume mapping issues. It's very common to map some volume, for example, for your database to some host directory, so that it's approachable after you kill or replace the container. But the file system is isolated within the Docker, as you probably know. But not entirely. They still use the same UIDs and host IDs, and I read something that's improving in Docker in the latest versions, but I'm not up to speed about it. We just ran into that. We get rights problems. When we create a directory on the host, and we say, okay, we map that to the container, then the container by default does not have access. So dirty hack at the end. In our entry point, we just change the owner of that directory to whatever user or group you are using within your container, so that it can approach that volume, that directory. It still feels like a dirty hack. There must be a better way. I found a solution for it on this URL, but it's also a bit of a hassle, I think, to do it that way. I have a feeling there must be a better way. But I don't know it yet.
Because the extra parser file is within the Docker container, so couldn't you change the parser file in the container to match the host machine?
Yes, that's one suggestion. That is also on the out there in the discussion. To just map the password file from your host to your container. But on Mac OS is different, on Windows is different, you know. So that has its drawbacks as well. But that's one possible solution. I even think that, that this volume mapping, I have the feeling it's intended more for mapping a database storage to some raw block of disk storage with special drivers and stuff like that. Don't know too much about that. But if you are mapping it like this from host file system to Docker container file system, then you run into this issue. And Docker is not the only container initiative. They support the Open Container Initiative. I think they were one of the founders for making it open and have an open specification for container implementations. There's a CoreOS company, and they have an alternative which is called Rocket, RKT. We have Apache and Mesos and Mesosphere. I didn't delve into all these tools. I'm just copying from this article that I found. Of course, there's Kubernetes that is supported or used a lot by Google to manage your containers. And there's Canonical, the Ubuntu company, is also coming up with an alternative. It's still early stages, I read, but they're working on it. So if you are an Ubuntu shop, or we are sort of an Ubuntu shop, then we might be looking into this. So, in summary, it's great. I think it's nice to. It's much less of a hassle to handle than virtual machines. It has a bit of a learning curve. And use them as cattle. I've already stated that several times, or as lightweight machines, virtual machines, and mind your pinching then. But really, the cattle approach seems the most common way to use it nowadays. And use some container management tool, like Docker Compose that we'll probably be using more. And be careful with your port mapping. That's it. Yes, we are using it. And 1 month ago, there came notice from the maintainer that he's stopping maintenance. He's sort of tired of it. And everybody was thanking him, and now they think, what now?
The Google Chrome actually announced that they will support Headless as well. So the Google team is taking over maintenance. So Phantom is a bit obsolete now.
Yes.
The maintainer thought.
Exactly. So we will probably at some time migrate to Google Headless, Chrome Headless, which has just been released, I think. Yep.
Any more questions? All right. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I was maybe asking for everyone around here if anyone has experience with Kubernetes. I'd like to talk maybe after. If anyone does.
I could add to that. If anyone, I'm skipping the next talk. If there are people using Docker who want to have a little informal meetup just outside here and talk about your experience with using Docker or Kubernetes or other orchestration tools, yeah, if we could just, in this weather, the coffee corner here, just outside in the
Okay, I'll check the program and then decide if I join. Thanks. Yeah, there's also Docker. Yeah, so there's a I don't know. Can you tell about something about it? The Docker Grun meetup? Okay, so that if you want to know more, that's also a great opportunity, of course, and I think it's totally okay to promote that here.
Docker Grun meetup. Yeah, you can find it on meetup.
Lots of members, I think hundreds, a couple of hundred, right? On the meetup website at least. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Maarten. Please give him a hand.
Good.
We have a small gesture.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Zo. Hè? Ja, dankjewel. Ah, dat was wel inderdaad een beetje kort, maar goed. Ja, ik heb niet echt geoefend, weet je wel. En Oké. Ja, met alle vragen erbij. Ja. Ja? Oké. Nou, dat vind ik leuk om te horen, ja. Hoi. Hey, bedankt. Ja. Ja, het is een beetje een boodschap van we doen het eigenlijk allemaal net niet goed, zeg maar. Maar ja, dat is, zo is het nou eenmaal, weet je wel.
Ja, precies.
En op zich, het werkt wel.
Je deelt je kennis heel goed. Ja.
Ja.
Dus ik denk wel dat iedereen dat een beetje leeft die ermee bezig is. Oh ja, met een goede spreker ook.
Ja, dankjewel.
Respect. Rustig.
Ja, weet je, de uitdaging was voor mij wel